So, as you've been able to see, it's a simple program. You've changed the logical in the user INI file, which is setting, I want to run a WPF, and you've got a very simple WPF screen up. That's very important, what you did, okay? Even though you've not written any code, you're running the exact same program, and we'll show this all the way through, and at the end you can swap it back. So if you change that logical back to false as opposed to true right at the end, then the same program will continue to run the toolkit version, and if you set it back to true, it'll run the WPF version. Okay? So that's like an important factor from the point of view that it's the same program, the same logic, talking to the same data. We're not rewriting this. We're doing it in a way. If, for example, you have a problem with your WPF on your live system, you could switch back to Toolkit and say, look, carry on, get doing what you need to do because we know the Toolkit version works while we fix a WPF version, and then you can change the logical again. Okay? It's not an all or nothing. It's a way to migrate. So, menu and toolbar processing. There is no toolbar on the sample Toolkit program. But a menu and a toolbar, as far as the toolkit's concerned, are one and the same. It's just one looks like a menu and one looks like a toolbar with buttons on. But essentially, if you don't have a menu in a toolkit application, you don't have the ability to do anything. Everything is derived and controlled by menu signals. Menu signals, obviously, they can come from a menu bar or entries on a menu bar or a menu column. They can come from a toolbar, and generally, a toolbar emulates what's already on a menu. They can also come from the buttons on your lists and your input windows, and they can also come from code with the old msignal routine. If we are going to emulate what our menu processing does, then we have to be conscious that we have to limit our menu names in our fancy new world WPF to 15 characters. Otherwise, we can't emulate them. In Toolkit, for example, you might have a menu in your application with f_new, which is a file menu, new entry, please. You can't then in XAML change that to this is a new entry, please, because it will not work if you then signal that back down to your existing code. So realistically, your menu names need to be the same. And that's not a bad thing, it's a very good thing, because one, the code continues to work, and secondly, when you're looking at the new fancy XAML that you're writing in your application, it will look like, or you will have references to the same menu names that you've got in your Toolkit programs and your Toolkit script files. You can define in your script file the menu columns, multiple ones, and the entries within those with lines and spaces. Not that you ever use spaces anymore. That was an old cell-based thing. And the entries. The entry's got a name, f_new, f_exit, and it's obviously the name that's very important. That's the 15 character limit, and that's what your program recognizes. So when the user hits that entry in the menu column, it's your code that recognizes f_new and f_exit. Obviously uppercased as well. You can also create menus in the toolkit at runtime, the MB_routines. We don't support that inside what we're doing today, and the Symphony Framework doesn't support creating menu columns at runtime. It's not impossible, but realistically, if you've got the ability to completely split your application over here and your UI over here, why would you have your application trying to make menu columns in your UI? Define your UI, define the menu columns within it, the menu entries in it. Remembering that it's better to have more and hide and disable things than not to have enough. So if you want to define in your XAML, your user interface, all your menu columns, all your entries, that's great, that's right. And then have your application say, well, for this particular application, I don't want to see that menu entry, or I don't want to see that menu column. And it's not like the toolkit where if you say you don't want to see it, it'll grey it out and you'll still be there. You can use various attributes and properties to say, collapse something away, hide it, make it invisible, whatever, so you don't see it. So they can't process it, they don't know it's there. So they can't be phoning you up saying, I can't get to this greyed out menu column. You just wouldn't see it. Toolbars. Obviously this program that we've given you hasn't got a toolbar in it, but you can handle toolbars within the UI Toolkit. You cannot create a toolbar in script, unfortunately, in the UI Toolkit, so everything's in code. TB toolbar, TB create says, I'd like to create a toolbar. And we are very flexible in the toolkit because you can have up to 4, and we allow you to place them anywhere, as long as the top, bottom, left or right, anchored to the sides of your application. And that's about it, really, from a toolkit point of view. But once you've created the toolbar, you can then add the buttons. The buttons can be text buttons, they can be image buttons, and that's about it. Obviously, in the WPF side, in the XAML, you can have any number and any sort of buttons on any sort of toolbars, on any sort of control, anywhere you want. You can anchor it to the top, the middle, float it, draggable, all that kind of stuff. And if you write a WPF application with all that tech capabilities in, it will still signal the same menu entries that your toolkit program's expecting. So just like the menu bar, the toolbar button, it's the name that gets signaled down to your application. You can also, with toolbars, say, oh, and by the way, don't signal the menu entry, call this routine, or press this virtual key, and things like that. We're keeping things simple and just saying it's going to signal the menu name. So we've got an input window. We can, at this moment in time, we can ignore the fields. We'll talk about those later in the day when we get to input processing. But the buttons at the bottom, so we've got the button save, button cancel, and button delete. So be save, be cancel, be delete. Again, it's the name of the buttons that are going to be the menu. This isn't a menu, it's a button on an input window, toolkit input window. But it still raises a signal, a menu signal that says this is what's been pressed. So that means that you could also have a menu bar in a toolkit program with be save, be cancel, and be delete on it. Okay? They're all one and the same thing. They all do the same thing back in the toolkit code. They raise that menu signal name. List processing. Can't do this in script. You can only do this in code. But you can define your list. Yeah, we're going to talk about list processing. But it's the L button bit where you're saying, I'd like to add this or more buttons onto the bottom of my list or the side of my list. I think you can have them at the left, middle, or right-hand side, top, middle, or bottom. We give you that amazing flexibility in the UI Toolkit. And again, it's a bit repetitive, but I'm trying to get the point across. It's the name of the button that gets signaled. And again, if you wanted to put the b_cancel as a menu entry on a menu column, you could do. It's all one and the same as far as the toolkit's concerned. And it will be one and the same as far as our WPF is concerned, and our XAML. We've got buttons on tab containers. So you can have buttons on tabs, and then windows inside your tabs that have got buttons on, and lists within inside your tabs that have got buttons on. But they all do the same thing. They raise the menu event named be save, be part, be exit, be cancel, be whatever button name you want, as long as I'm less than 15 characters. Some of these you can do in script. A lot of them, like list processing, tab processing, as you can see, you can't do in script. It's all in code. Even though it's just one menu entry, so on a menu bar you might have an entry called be save. You might have an input window with a button on that says be save. You might have a tab container with a button on that says be save. And you might have a list window with a button on that says be save. Would be nice if you could issue one command that said disable everything that says be save, please. But you can't. So menu entries, you would do an mdisable that says disable this entry. So you'll still see it, it'll be grayed out, but they can't click it. And really, it's not nice if you've got menu entries that allow them to click that don't do anything. That's not right and appropriate, really. So in the toolkit, you grey it out. In the WPF side, you'll be able to grey it out, or you'll be able to hide it. Okay? So you can actually hide it away from them if you wish. If it's a button, even though it signals the same thing as a menu entry, you have to use be enable or be disable to grey it out or grey it in, as they say. It's not a single line of code to handle all the different possible places you can have these menu signals. It's multiple lines of code in Toolkit, because you might have, as I said, the same button on your tab container, your list, your input window. You'd have to call 3 be enable or be disable to be able to handle each button on each individual unit tab container input window. What we've done is developed a framework addition to the Symphony Framework called Symphony UI Toolkit. Symphony UI Toolkit is not the toolkit just put under Symphony and made into XAML and WPF. It's not that. Symphony UI Toolkit is a framework that will help you to migrate away from Toolkit by replicating some of what the toolkit does, but from a WPF XAML user interface approach. Okay? So it's not a direct replacement for menu processing, direct replacement for input processing, direct replacement for select processing. That would be impossible. It's been tried, we've looked at it, it would be impossible. And even if we did do it and could do it, it would look like Toolkit. And that's not what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to achieve the same program running, but looking as a nice modern WPF application, not as a cell-based implementation on Windows a la Toolkit. Okay? So we're not trying to just be a box-by-box replacement. We're a framework that allows you to step-by-step migrate away from the toolkit. The Symphony UI Toolkit will begin to grow as time goes on. I'm not saying it does absolutely everything you need it to do today, and it will grow and improve as time permits. But we have a toolkit command. The toolkit command is based on the concept of signaling menus. Now, I've said a few times that menus can come from menu entries or buttons, etc. That's what we can now do through the Symphony UI Toolkit, is we can handle menus, toolbars, buttons on windows, button on lists, buttons on anything, and replicate the same concept. Inside the Symphony Framework itself, we've got this thing called a rooted command base. And a rooted command is just the way you can do commanding in WPF. It sounds fancy, it's not. It's like a command that you can bind between your application and the user interface. So when something on the user interface happens, for example, they click a button, this command that you've bound to it does something, i.e. it signals a menu signal, or it runs a piece of code inside your application. We have the ability to raise these menu signals, this m_events, back to our existing Synergy program. Remember a few minutes ago I talked about create everything in your user interface and hide it away if you don't want it in that particular application. Or give it all a default of it's all hidden and just reveal the bits you want, the menu entries or the menu columns or the buttons on your various windows, lists, etc. Well, this command, this toolkit command, gives you that ability. So if you say a toolkit command is invisible, every single element of your user interface that binds to that one toolkit command will be invisible. It'll still be there, but you won't be able to see it, the user won't be able to see it, they won't be able to process it, they won't be able to click it, okay? And it's a single point of contact as far as your application's concerned. So you'll set one command to be invisible, and anything, so if you've got that command bound to a menu entry, or a button on a toolbar, or a button on an input window, all three will disappear by that setting that one command. So it's not like the toolkit where you've got multiple lines of code to do the same thing. We then have a command controller class inside the Symphony UI Toolkit that basically creates what we call a dictionary. A dictionary is like a collection. It's like an array, an expandable array, but it's keyed. Okay? So you give a dictionary a key and what you want to store against that key, and that what you want to store can be anything. And in our instance, we store the toolkit command. So we create this dictionary of commands. And the key to the command is going to be the menu name. Okay? So if we've got a menu name in our existing application of f_new, we're going to create a command inside our command controller with a key of f_new and a value of our toolkit command entity, object. And what that means is the same code that we're used to seeing with f_new as the menu entry will still be there in our XAML and our intermediate code between our XAML and our toolkit program. You have standard methods in this command controller to load your commands. Because just because you've defined it in the XAML, you might lay things out in the XAML, the program doesn't know about it, so you need to have this connector. Now we've been talking for years about views and models and view model. The view is what you see on the screen. The view model is the contract that glues everything together, and the model's your data and your logic. Okay? So it's the view model that we expose this command controller. And the command controller then exposes its dictionary to the view that says, well, I can bind that element in the view, be it a menu or a button, to this particular entity or object inside my command controller. And then the command controller, when something's executed, i.e. a button's clicked, will go back to your application, your model, and do the logic. Okay? It might sound confusing, but as you see the code, it will become clear. So we can load these commands into our application. And again, because the various things have got default states, in the YAML you can have all your menu entries and all your buttons defined, but if you don't load them in your application, you won't see them when you run the application. So things get hidden away, so you're not trying to build things up at runtime. We inject the event handler that says, well, when they do execute this command, what do you want me to do? And the event handler is going to be a very simple thing that you're going to write that says, signal a menu back to my host traditional Synergy program that's hosting my new Synergy.NET WPF. Once it raises that menu signal, you're going to then do some simple coding to dispatch it to the right routine, because it depends what sort of menu signal it is. So we have a menu controller class. The menu controller class exposes this command controller that allows the menu event style processing. You're going to load the commands, your fnew, your bsave, your bdelete, your bcancel, your fexit. You'll define all those, and you'll anchor to them the event handler that says, I want to raise a menu signal back to my host Synergy program. You've data bind those in the XAML, and in your code, now this code can be in the Synergy code. Now when I say Synergy, I didn't say traditional Synergy and I didn't say Synergy.NET. When I just say Synergy code, that means it's either or traditional Synergy or Synergy.NET. So you might have logic in your existing traditional Synergy Toolkit program where you want to enable and disable menus. Well, you can do the enabling and disable menus in that traditional Synergy logic using the enable, disable commands and place, remove commands. Or you can do it in the Synergy.NET if you're writing a new bit of code to do some new fancy stuff. Doesn't matter. These commands are available to the Synergy.NET and the traditional Synergy areas of the application. So here's an example of loading the commands. So you're creating a new command controller. This is in our Synergy.NET view model. Okay? You're loading the commands. Notice the names. fnew, fexit, bsave, bcancel and bdelete. Basically any menu signal that your toolkit application is going to expect to happen, you need to create a command or load a command that replicates that emulates it. So, as we said in our simple application, we've got fnew and fexit, and then those buttons, they were bdelete, bcancel and bsave. So those are the 5. That's why we've got the 5 on the screen. So our simple application has got those 5. Your application is going to have a lot more than that. So you'll have a list and you'll just create them all. And then for a particular application, you'd hide them, disable them, do whatever you wanted to. But you'd sort of have a common across all my applications menu processing controller, essentially, where you say, load all these commands because I want my user interface to bind to them and I want my traditional Synergy Toolkit program to recognize them. So we use the same names. We're not going to try and map fnew in our existing toolkit application to this is a super new entry in my new WPF. We stick to the same names, and it's the original menu names. This is our event handler. I said that every command has an event handler that we bind to, or we inject into, sorry, not bind to, when we inject into, when we create it. This is ours, do command executed. So whenever a command is executed, and a command gets executed when they select it on a menu bar, they press a button, or they do something on the user interface that causes the menu command to be executed, we're going to raise TK menu signal. Raise TK menu signal is part of the Symphony Framework, and that's our way of saying, okay, give me the name of the menu command, fnew, fsave, and send it all the way back to my traditional Synergy UI Toolkit program. So this is our Synergy.net view model area. Something on the view is bound to a command. They've clicked a button, they've selected a menu entry. It comes to here, it raises an event, raises that TK menu signal, and that then sends it back to the name of the menu, back into my traditional host Synergy UI Toolkit program. So from that point onwards, my traditional Synergy UI Toolkit program thinks that a menu of f_new or f_exit has been raised. So here we're in traditional Synergy land. So this is what we call our boilerplate code. And we have this boilerplate on top of our existing Synergy application that is the communicator between traditional UI Toolkit land and our Synergy.net land. Okay, we have this very thin boilerplate that says, okay, I've got this menu signal coming in, what do I do with it? Well, I set gentnam to be the name of the menu signal, I set gselect to be true, and I set gsetsts to be 0. Because those are the three things that input processing set, list processing set, menu processing set in Toolkit. They set those three entities. So we're just replicating what the UI Toolkit does when we hit a menu or a button. We're just replicating that. And then what we do is call into the program. You can see this program states.menu signal. That's what we call touch points. And a touch point is a way to tell the code that's going to execute, your existing traditional program that's going to execute. A touch point indicates whereabouts you want to jump into the execution point. Because the concept of an I-input loop doesn't really exist anymore because you're not waiting on the UI Toolkit to do the input processing. Your user interface is doing the input processing or the list processing or whatever sort of processing you're doing. And we're raising this menu signal back in. So we need to jump into the top of the program and then have this touch point that says jump to input processing, I've got a menu signal, so go off and do something with it. Or list processing, I've got a menu signal, go off and do something with it. So these touch points, and I'll come more on to the touch points later, but basically here you're saying, this is what I want to do, and that part_list where we're doing the X sub R, that's where I want to go and do it. So I know that this menu entry, because of where I am in the application, I want to go into list processing, and I want to raise that menu entry into that code. From the XAML point of view, from the user interface, there's quite a bit more code here. I'm creating a menu bar, I'm creating menu items, so I've got a file menu item with a new entry on it and an exit entry. So there's a lot more code than the equivalent .menu, .entry, .entry. Okay? It looks a lot more verbose, but you can do a lot more with it. You can have pictures and images and fancy things. Okay? You can set the size of things. But the important thing to note is the menu name. Because I've got this dictionary of commands hidden away inside my application, I can reference the dictionary using a key. And the key is the name of the menu. So in my traditional application, in my script file, I'd have .menu file, .entry f_new, .entry f_exit. In here, I've got a menu item, I've got my command dictionary, and by the way, the entry is f_new, and the key entry is f_exit. So there's a correlation now between my XAML code and my script. Yeah, you could argue that we could code generate this sort of thing. I'm not saying we should, I'm not saying we could, but that you could argue we could easily replicate and code generate what you've already got in script files. I think you'd sooner get your hands dirty in the XAML and make things look a little nicer than just trying to replicate what the toolkit looks like, because you'll put images against it. You can have checkbox menu columns and all that kind of good stuff. And you can have buttons on toolbars, etc., etc. But the important aspect here is this key to the command dictionary that you don't need to worry about. We've hidden all that away in the Symphony UI Toolkit, but you can reference it using the key being the same menu names. Under program control then, you need to be able to enable menu entries, buttons, disable menu entries, buttons. So we've given you the enable command and disable command methods that take the names of your menus entries, the names of your buttons. So as long as fnew exists in your user interface and it exists in your menu commanding dictionary, then this will all work and it will disable or enable that entry. You can also hide and reveal them as well, so you can collapse them away. So it's more functional than just the standard menu entry, menu processing of the toolkit. This gets a little bit confusing because when I was developing this, I sort of did it all for menus and did it all for toolbars and thought they're identical really in concept. Not visually, but in concept they are. They do exactly the same thing. They raise a menu event. So I did it so they shared the command dictionary. So basically when you create your menu controller, you then create a toolbar controller and inject the menu controller into it. Or vice versa. You create a toolbar controller and then when you create the menu controller, you inject the toolbar controller into it. And all that means is that dictionary of menu name and what you want to do with it, it just means they're shared between the menu processing routines that the Symphony UI Toolkit give you and the toolbar processing routines. And what it means is, if you've got a piece of code that in your traditional application that says, I want to disable a menu entry, then you'd use your menu controller routines. And if you had a piece of code that says, I want to disable or enable a toolbar entry, you can use your toolbar enable and disable methods and routines. But they, in fact, talk to the same controller dictionary. Again, I did say it sounds confusing, and it does, but once you get your head around it, it's not quite that bad. We can create a toolbar. If you ran up the application, you've got the little program that had the file menu. It also had a toolbar. So I've taken the buttons off the input windows and the list, and I've put them on the toolbar. And we'll be able to enable and disable those as we're going through the application. So they're only enabled or disabled at the appropriate times, but they're still using the same b_save, b_cancel, b_delete menu entries that the buttons signal. And yes, it looks like we've got a lot of verbose XAML code in here, but so what? It makes it look pretty. Okay, it doesn't look like a pretty button in XAML, but when you run it, it looks like a pretty button. And it's got things that the toolkit doesn't give you, very simply. Like that. That just one line of code means when somebody hovers over it, it'll grow a little bit. And when they hover away, it'll shrink back. Hover over it, it grows a bit. It sounds nothing, but believe you me, it makes such a difference to a user when they're moving over something, when it grows, they go, oh, I can do something with that. If you take that one line out and run the program, it looks, well, can I? Does it do anything? Put it back in, and when you go, oh yeah, I can. It may sound small, but from a user point of view, it's very important. But we've got the same entries into our dictionary. Our dictionary is all our buttons and menu bars and toolbars that our traditional application knows, all in one nice place. They're not scattered over button routines and menu routines and toolbar routines. It's one dictionary. This bit here looks a bit verbose, but all it's doing is saying, if I'm enabled, then have a nice save image. If I'm disabled, then have a grayed out image. Okay? So when we change the enablement of a command in our dictionary, then that will toggle what the image on the button will look like. And we can do exactly the same for menus. We can toggle the images on a menu. So if you disable the new on the menu bar, you'll get a disabled image and a disabled entry. So yes, the XAML code is verbose compared to what you've used to in script, but you can do so much more with it. Can you see the similarities of what we're trying to do in that you've got a menu entry in your traditional program that you need to replicate? We've got a myriad of opportunities in the XAML to be able to do menus, toolbars, buttons, whatever. And we've got this single dictionary that is all your commands, irrespective of in the toolkit program, whether it's a menu, a toolbar, or a button. Doesn't matter. We don't care anymore. In the intermediate code, in the dictionary of commands, we group them all together and we say they're all menu commands or they're all toolbar commands. They're essentially the same class with a different name. Okay? They do give a slightly different interface because you can't remove menu entries, but you can remove toolbar buttons. So I've enabled that on both, I think. I'll have to look at that. I'll get back to you. I don't pretend to know everything. So you've got this collection of commands that replicate what the toolkit program is going to expect, and then in the XAML you can bind anything to it. Buttons, toolbars, toolbar buttons, menu entries, etc. Okay? Okay, it's your turn now. You are going to build the menu command dictionary. I've written the XAML for you, the XAML you've seen on the screen. Okay, I've replicated that because there's 2 menu entries and 3 toolbar buttons, but it's exactly the same XAML you've seen on the screen. Obviously, your Visual Studio project, you've got all the code in there. So if you want to go and look through the XAML, the different windows, the view model, everything, feel free. Just don't change it, because if you change it, you'll probably break it. But barring that, it's all there. There's no sort of smoke and mirrors. But what you're going to do is build that dictionary of menu commands. Think of a menu command. Always think of a menu command, irrespective of whether it's a menu, a toolbar, or a button. It's a command now. So you're going to build that dictionary of commands, and then you're going to write the code that handles that command and sends it back into the Synergy program. And then you'll add code that allows you to enable them and disable them. So you've got your little WPF, and it's got your menu bar and your 3 buttons on. What we need to be able to do is make sure that when you first come up, in that list, you don't see, or you're not allowed to touch or feel or execute the 3 buttons, because the 3 buttons are only applicable when you go into selecting one and you're in edit mode or in new mode. Okay? When you're in new mode, you shouldn't be able to delete. So it's things like that, which the program does now. From a toolkit point of view, you're just going to emulate what it needs to do, exactly the same, but from a WPF point of view. And you'll see how we do that coding. It's very similar, so you're not sort of learning new ways of doing things.